I'm making this video today to talk about some things that are incredibly important to Vedic astrology and understanding the astronomy behind the astrology. This is important especially when you're understanding the zodiacs, how the zodiacs work. Of course, there's a whole lot of stuff now about which zodiac is right, and for a long time we've had a mixture of Western astrologers that actually use a sidereal zodiac. Now there's a small group of Vedic astrologers who use tropical zodiac, and there's this temptation to get into which one is right and argue about it, which to me is kind of ridiculous. And I'm going to talk about and show what how the zodiacs work, what the calendar is, why we have a calendar and how we try to reconcile this calendar, what the calendar is based on, and different types of timing cycles that are only understood when you once you delve into the astronomy behind it, because all the calendars are based actually on the astronomy, and the same is true with the zodiacs. Trying to reconcile the sky with the timing of life on Earth is what the calendar is trying to do, and what the zodiac is trying to do as well. So just in a general sense, in the East you have many calendars that are mainly based on the moon and the relationship of the sun and the moon. In the West, the calendar is based on the Earth going around the sun, which has nothing to do with the sun going around, with the moon going around the Earth. So I'm going to delve into these things in a minute. I want to show you this diagram that I have behind me. I'm going to have to get out of the way because it takes up the whole board. But you see I have the sun, Earth, and the moon. This is a general representation of the way the sun and Earth and the moon works. You have the sun here, and the Earth goes around the sun, and then the moon goes around the Earth. You have to understand these three things are completely independent of each other, or I should say these two revolutions. The Earth going around the sun has nothing to do in and of itself with the moon going around the Earth. But what happens is they've synchronized over the course of billions of years to where the timing of these two orbits are almost exactly in sync. I want to show the rest of this diagram first, and then I'll start to explain these things. So in the rest of this diagram I have, for example, the zodiac signs. These are sidereal zodiac signs, which means they're fixed. They're based on these positions in space. So you have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. One of the reasons I use the South Indian chart, as I've explained many times to people who watch my videos, is the South Indian chart is actually a representation of this. When you're looking at the South Indian chart with the squares, you just visualize that the Earth is in the middle of it. And this is this circle of stars going around the Earth, the circle of signs. So if you can put this whole thing kind of in the middle. I just put the zodiac here as a backdrop so you can also see the rest of the zodiac is over here. So Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn. So having said all of that, let me talk about the calendar for a second and why we have things like leap years and whatnot. The calendar is based on the Earth going around the sun. Simple as that. It takes 365¼ days for the Earth to go around the sun. And we approximate this now with a calendar that is called the Gregorian Calendar, and it resets on January 1st. That's when it, quote, starts again, which is an arbitrary, date. It really doesn't exist in cosmic time, but it's a time where we start it. And then each year, if you want to mark important dates, like on your birthday, the sun, let's say the Earth was at this position when you were born. Every time the Earth comes back to this position every year, the Earth comes back to this position every year in its orbit around the sun, that's your birthday. You have to understand that the motion of the sun through the zodiac is an apparent motion. It actually doesn't exist. The sun is stationary. It's the Earth going around the sun which gives the sun the apparent motion of going around the zodiac. And that's the case with all the planets. The Earth in the zodiac scheme is not moving. It's everything moving in relation to the Earth. So if you were born, let's say January 25th, when the Earth was here in its orbit, which it's not, this would actually be kind of around, September. But if it were here, then January 1st each year, the Earth would come back to that point. That's a that's the calendar that we're used to, based on the Earth going around the sun. It doesn't take anything else into consideration. It doesn't take into consideration the moon going around the Earth. It doesn't take into consideration even, any kind of zodiac signs that's fixed. And I'm saying this intentionally because these are fixed stars, what you would call the sidereal zodiac. So Earth going around the sun doesn't take any of that into account. What they did, and it's approximately 365 days, 365 and a quarter days. So with what happened over time is this 365 and a quarter days would create problems with the solstices. So the reason that we started to put in a leap year several hundred, several thousand years ago, first with the Julian calendar, then with the Gregorian calendar, is because what would happen is that they were trying to get it so that the solstice points would line up approximately with the same day each year. There was a time when we had a 360-day year, and they would add an extra month every, how many years would that be? I don't know, every 13 years or something. Sorry. So it would accumulate every 30, after 30, every 6 years, because it was 360, and then you would have 5 extra days each year, and then every 6 years you would add a month. So they've tried to account for this many times throughout history. What they do now is they have 365 days, and every 4 years you add a leap day. This is because they wanted to keep the solstices with integrity and have them be around the 21st of the days when you have the sun changing direction, or when you have the solstice and the equinox points. Very clearly, the Western calendar is based on trying to make consistent days line up with the Earth's movement around the sun, because the solstice points and the equinox points are the cardinal points in the Earth's orbit around the sun. The summer and winter solstice are when when the sun are at its extreme positions, the brightest day, the darkest day, and then the equinoxes are when these times are equal, when you have an equal amount of sunlight in the northern and southern hemispheres. So that is what's important in Western calendars: the sun and its relationship to the Earth, Earth relationship to the sun. This is why it's also called, when you start using this in Western astrology, it's called a tropical zodiac. It has nothing to do with the stars. There's no fixed position. As this starts to change, because the Earth starts to wobble on its axis, and over thousands of years, even over hundreds of years, these signs are no longer where they were back when even all these calendars were getting fixed and getting worked out. So that's what Western calendars are mainly based on. Eastern calendars are based on the sun-moon relationship. For example, for instance, we have Chinese New Year. In India, we have Hindu festivals. India has different months, the masas. In India and in Eastern countries, the month begins when the sun and the moon come together. Like, for instance, in this diagram, you would have the approximately a full moon, because you have the Earth in between the sun and the moon. In this example, 15 days later, when the moon was here, you would have a new moon, which is the beginning of the cycle. So Eastern calendars are based on when the sun and moon come together and start the cycle. Sometimes they're based on the full moons as well. It makes more sense sort of cosmically, and in fact, the cosmic implications of cosmic time, which is not a matter of external time, but of internal time, makes a lot more sense that the cycle begins on the new moon. And in fact, you see this also reflected in Indian or Hindu festivals. Very rarely do they begin on the full moon. There's really one major full moon festival, and it's called Guru Purnima, but it's a day of worship. It's not a beginning of a cycle. The beginning of cycles, which you see in things like Navaratri, which is a Divine Mother festival, other important festivals like Diwali, and other things start on the new moon. Just like, for instance, Chinese New Year. That's when you have a new moon. Sun and moon come together. So their calendars, their timing, their festivals are based on this more cosmic time, which is a relationship between the sun, moon, and earth. It has nothing to do with the earth going around the sun. That's the important component for you to understand. These aren't arbitrary, they're totally different. For instance, this is why Chinese New Year can happen on any day of the year. The beginning of Navratri, a Hindu festival, can happen on any day of the year because it's based on the new moon. It's not based on a calendar date, which is trying to approximate this. It's based on when the sun, moon, and earth line up at the right time. So those things have nothing to do with a Gregorian calendar date. It's not as if the Gregorian calendar dates are irrelevant, because they definitely show the sun going around the earth. But for the most part, it's very much an extrapolation. Meaning, for instance, and this isn't to say that the zodiac is invalid, but in tropical zodiac, and people who do tropical astrology, they say, well, tropical signs are more precise because it's about the earth going around the sun. Okay, but it's measuring cardinal points. Okay, that definitely makes sense when you have seasons. Like, it makes sense that if you want to say it, then it would make sense that Aries falls on the first day of spring. But then why not just have 4 zodiac signs then? Spring, summer, winter, fall, because that's actually the only, that's where the integrity of that zodiac makes sense. You don't have months within the tropical zodiac. You don't have a month. You have Aries, but then where does Taurus come from? Well, it's calculated, it's a mean calculation between the summer solstice and between the vernal equinox and the summer solstice. Then you say about 30 days later it goes into Taurus, but there is no sign of Taurus. That's an abstraction. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying that's how that works. When you take the earth around the sun and you carve it up 12 ways, there's really only 4 cardinal points that get initiated here. Whereas when you take the sun, moon, and earth, you have 12 distinct months. 12 times during the year, you're going to have sun, moon, and earth come together. And this is what I'm getting to in a larger sense. 12 times you're going to have sun, moon, and earth come together. Boom, boom, within a year. So, and those 12 distinct moments are going to be 12 months, very organically. This is one of the reasons why you initially had a 360 day year. Because it was timed to these 12 cycles, right? Because within a 365-day year, you have 12 lunar cycles. So understand this. I want you to get this. The reason, have you ever asked yourself, why are there 12 signs in both systems? Why 12? Where does 12 come from? Why are there 12 sidereal signs and 12 tropical signs? Again, as we just saw, 12 has no relationship to tropical zodiac. If tropical zodiac is the most important thing, then why not 4? There's 4 cardinal points, and they need to be measured, but why 12? Because 12, there are 12 lunar cycles, lunation cycles, 12 new moons, back to another new moon, in one year. When the earth goes around the sun once, there's approximately 12 solar cycles or lunar cycles. It happens approximately 12 times a year. This is why there are 12 sidereal signs, 12 tropical signs. You need to carve it up into 12 because there are 12 lunar cycles in a year. So when we start bickering about zodiacs, we have to remember that if we can't just focus entirely on the earth going around the sun. Because in that case, why 12 signs? 12 is this cosmic time-keeping device. There are 12 lunar cycles in 1 year. Keep it simple. That's the simple thing to say. Why is that important? Because what that does is it brings together the orbits of the sun, moon, and earth. What I said at the beginning needs to be really understood. When I said you have to understand the cosmic implications of astronomy to deepen your astrological understanding, and the zodiacs are an important part of it. What I mean to say is this, and understand this clearly. These orbits have nothing to do with each other. There is no empirical value, or there's no empirical reason why the orbits of the moon and the earth are timed to approximately 12 solar cycles, or 12, increments. The orbit of the moon going around the Earth has nothing to do with the orbit of the Earth going around the sun in and of itself. They're different bodies just moving. But now, over billions of years' time, these cycles are timed to almost perfect synchronicity. It's pretty remarkable that there are pretty much approximately, very close. Again, one of the things is people want everything to be utter perfection, but life on Earth is not utter perfection. It's off just a little bit, but it's really close, really close. And it's really close that there are 12 lunar cycles in one orbit around the sun. So this amazing timing that's happening in the sky, where as the Earth goes around the sun once, within it, the moon goes around the Earth 12 times. Whoosh, whoosh, 12 times. This is where you can extrapolate 4 directions and 3 signs for the tropical zodiac. This is why it's not just 4 signs at 4 cardinal points. You need to carve it up by 12 because the 12 tropical signs are also trying to approximate 12 lunar cycles. But they're not connected to the lunar cycles. In fact, neither is the sidereal zodiac in Vedic astrology. Neither of them are connected anymore to the 12 lunar cycles that exist in a year, because you can't line all of that up. None of it lines up exactly. And I'm going to talk in a second about the Vedic Panchanga, the earliest timekeeping system that the Indian people used, where it lines up very closely, but it's also different. But you have to understand, all of these zodiacs on a cosmic level are a little bit, nothing lines up with absolute precision. You have to see which one works best for you. But this is why we get 12 signs rather than 4 if it's tropical, and why there are even 12 sidereal signs. Why 12 signs? When we have 27 nakshatras, where did 12 signs come from? Well, because they were using the nakshatra zodiac, and then from there, they understand that a year, or one time around this wheel, must be carved up 12 ways, because we have 12 lunar cycles within one completion of the sun around the Earth. So, and now, just to finish, in the Eastern calendar, they still put primary importance on the initiation of a new lunar cycle. That's when the month begins. The month begins, celebrations begin, festivals begin. Even if they don't begin, they're timed to the sun-moon relationship. New moon, that's when it starts. That's the beginning of the cycle of that month. Now, something else to really understand is that, well, I'll talk about the Vedic timekeeping also now, which is called the Panchanga. This method of timekeeping actually is probably the closest to approximating the cosmic implications of sun, moon, and earth. Because what you wind up having is a relationship between, first of all, with the moon and its lunar phases, the moon and its daily entrance and exit into nakshatras, and the moon and its relationship to the sun in what are called nitya yogas. And then you also have half of a nitya yoga, which is called a karana, and then you also have the Lord of the Day, which is called a vara. So Panchanga means 5 divisions. And you have what's called the Vara, which is the Lord of the Day. Each planet rules one of the days. Sun is ruled by, the sun rules Sunday, moon rules Monday. Then you have the Nakshatra, which is the 27-fold division of the sky. Then you have the Tithi, which is the lunar phase. Means the first lunar day, second lunar day, which unfolds in 12-degree increments. Nakshatras are 13-degree, 20-minute increments, which shows how far the moon moves in one day. The lunar phase, the Tithi, shows how far the moon separates from the sun each day. For instance, the new moon is a Tithi, what's called a Tithi. And the new moon has nothing to do with the sign, has nothing to do with the nakshatra. The new moon is the relationship of the sun, moon, and earth. It's when, from the earth, wherever we are on the earth, in its orbit around the sun, the moon lines up and it's at the same place, the same point. That's the beginning. And that's what's called Pratipada, the first Tithi. Okay? After the moon moves about 12 degrees from that, it's in its separation from the sun, then we have, then the second Tithi begins, third Tithi, and this is what's called the waxing moon. The moon is getting bigger. Then we have the full moon, like we would see here. Then after that full moon, the moon starts to wane again. So that's called the Tithi. It's basically the lunar phases. Then you have the Nitya Yoga, which is you measure the longitude of the sun and the longitude of the moon from the sidereal beginning point. So from 0 Aries, or the beginning of the sidereal zodiac, I guess some would say it's tropical zodiac if you're using tropical zodiac now. That doesn't really seem to make sense to me, but I'm not going to get into the debate. I'm going to just say in classical Vedic astrology, as 99.99% of the astrologers have used, you measure the longitude of the sun, the sidereal longitude, the ecliptic longitude, using sidereal zodiac, from the sun to the moon. Like here you would have, let's say, you would have the sun is in Leo, so from Aries, that's 120. So it's, so you have 30, 60, 90, 120, 150. Excuse me. I always never do math on camera. It's true, actually. So 30, 60, 90, 120, 150. So it would be about 150. And then the moon, Aries over here would be, or, the moon would be, let's say, then you add another 400, and then you collapse that into one calculation. And there are 27 what are called Nitya Yogas. It winds up being a variable between the longitudes of the sun and the longitudes of the moon. That's called a Nitya Yoga. Nitya is a word for the sun. So it's a sun-moon yoga. It brings together these calculations of, it's basically the arc angle between the sun and the moon. Whatever the arc is between the sun and the moon at any given time, relative to this point, there's a 27-fold assignment to it. And then you have half of that, which is called the Karana. Half the Nitya Yoga is the Karana. I'm sorry, excuse me, I said this wrong. It's the Karana is half of the Tithi, excuse me. Half of the lunar day is a Tithi, or is a Karana, excuse me. So the Tithi, which is the lunar phase, is actually one day, but half of that is called the Karana. So it breaks up the lunar day, like for instance the full moon. Instead of it having it be all day, you have about 12 hours of one Karana, 12 hours of another. This timekeeping method was mainly developed at a time when they were consecrating temples and bringing spirit into form. This was actually very much separate from horoscopic astrology of 12 signs, because even that Nitya Yoga is measured from the nakshatra, not from any astrology sign, any 12-fold division of the sky, which we now call the zodiac or zodiacal astrology. So that system, that Panchanga, that Vedic system, is totally, sidereal based. From 0 Ashwini, you measure these yogas, and you and each one of the the tithis and the nakshatras, they don't have anything to do with these signs, basically. So this relationship of sun, moon, and earth come together very powerfully in the Panchanga. But one of the things is that the Panchanga is mainly used, and it's still used today in Vedic ceremonies, for calling in spirit. Just like it was used in the ancient times, it's not just a time to select auspicious moments to do things, which is how it's been sort of codified. In fact, I'm not even sure that it works best for that, because it's very much a cosmic relationship. It's a cosmic connection between the sun, moon, and earth. What I mean to say is that when you see Vedic priests do sankalpa, when you see them do an offering before they do a puja, they still use all of these qualities of the Panchanga. You'll hear them talk about the different components of the Panchanga. They don't necessarily talk about the Rashi, the Zodiac sign. They talk about the Nakshatra, the Tithi, the Nitya Yoga, maybe the Karana, the Vara, the Lord of the Vara, the Lord of the Day. Then they'll also talk about things like the Ayana, whether it's the winter solstice, summer solstice. They'll talk about the Yuga. They'll talk about the location in space. All of these things get talked about. And as they evoke these qualities of the cosmic time, because this cosmic time is not about physical time. They're calling the deities from the other dimension and bringing them into this dimension. What happens is they will include our local space. For instance, if you were to do a puja for where I am right now, San Francisco, they won't say the calendar date. They don't say the date. They say the cosmic date, the cosmic place. So San Francisco might be the place on Earth, but then when you want to find the time, the cosmic time, so they know when to come to San Francisco, you wouldn't say January 15th, 2016. That has nothing to do with the cosmos. You would say, Ashwini Nakshatra, Chaturthi Tithi, Krishna Paksha, Budvara. You would say this specific moment in cosmic time that's related to the sun, moon, and earth. So the initial usage of the Vedic zodiac that we now apply into birth charts and whatnot, its original usage and current usage still is to show our place and time on a cosmic level to the deities we're calling to our puja, to our worship, to our moment. So if you go to like a puja where they're doing, let's say, a Ganesha puja, at the beginning they're going to, before they talk about offering anything to Ganesha, before he's even mentioned, the priest purifies himself, then he starts saying, here we are, we're in San Francisco, we're here, and we have this arrangement of the planets, this Tithi, this Nakshatra, this Nitya Yoga, this Vara, it's this Ayana, it's this Yuga, here's where we are. So come from where you are, which is in your cosmic loka, in your cosmic dimension, and come from there here and inhabit this statue that we're all looking at. We're looking at a statue. We want you to come from where you are to right here. It's actually very literal. But again, we get addicted to our place on Earth and our time in some Gregorian calendar, which has nothing to do with the sky. And they're saying, no. The cosmic time is shown this way. This Tithi, this Nitya Yoga, this Nakshatra, this Vara. Here's where we are. We're here in this physical place, and we're here in this cosmic time place. So it's a complete different usage of time. And so again, when we get into all kinds of things about the zodiac, this is why, frankly, some of my colleagues who are, and I like people, I like everybody who, if people want to use tropical zodiac or sidereal zodiac in any system, I'm all for it because they're both legitimate systems. When people want to argue and debate and try to prove other people wrong, I just don't want to hear it because to me it's missing the point. This is the point. The point is the zodiac itself, the invisible lines in the sky are somewhat arbitrary for the most part. And what happens once you start practicing astrology is an astrologer is going to use a set of techniques and methods. And when someone tries to pull the zodiac out of that specific, of all of the things that they're doing in their method and say, here's the reason it works, well, and then argue about it, doesn't make sense because everything that they would do, obviously, if they're using that zodiac with their methods and they're getting good results, then it works. It's actually too simple to argue about. I have no argument. Okay, what you're doing, this works better for you. Okay. If you get on a crusade to try to prove the other one wrong, it's nonsense. It's completely legitimate that you would have both of these ways of measuring time, but what we don't want to forget is the miracle that has taken place over billions of years where these three orbits are now timed, or these two orbits are now timed to each other. They're not only timed to each other, but even a size differential is there. So what I'm saying again, just to reiterate, it's a remarkable miracle that the Earth going around the Sun approximately 360 days. By the way, that's why we have 360 degrees in a circle. Where do you think that came from? It came from the Earth going around the Sun. The Sun moves about 1 degree every day, right? But again, it's not the Sun moving, it's the Earth moving around the Sun, which makes the Sun appear to go around the zodiac. But the fact that the Earth going around the Sun is approximately 360 days, and the Earth going around the Moon, this directly approximates 12 lunar cycles, 12 30-day lunar cycles. And again, this is one more thing you can understand about Vedic astrology. Their relationship with the moon is much more precise. in Western astrology, you don't have 15 lunar days. At least it's not generally carved up that way. You have first quarter, third quarter. Vedic astrology, that lunar day is exact. It's like one day, it's how far the moon separates from the sun in one day. That's it. And it's about 12 degrees. Every day the moon moves about 12 degrees each day. And there are 15 of them, which is a fortnight, which is half of a month. And then half of the month is waxing. Those 15 days the moon is waxing. The next 15 days the moon is waning, and it starts over. This is Vedic timekeeping. Sun, moon, earth timed to where there are 12 lunar cycles in 1 year. But there's 5¼ days left over. So Western culture grappled with this because Western culture, again, we're not timed to the sun. We're not timed to the earth and the moon cycle. This is why our calendar is it's a solar calendar, timed to equinoxes, and this sloppiness of the extra 5 days they grappled with for thousands of years, adding a month every 6 years for a while, then adding a day every, then adding 5 days and then an extra day every 4 years is where we're at now. But that has nothing to do with the actual stars, with the sky itself, with what's called sidereal zodiac or the fixed zodiac. And this sidereal zodiac, this fixed zodiac, is what the tropical zodiac is measured in relation to. We don't just say the tropical zodiac moves, it moves in relation to the sidereal zodiac. So sidereal zodiac is primary, and it goes back into the mists of time where they talked about both zodiacs. They talked about them correctly. They weren't wrong. They weren't confused. They knew what they were talking about. At some point, the writings got confusing when we passed through the Dark Ages, but that's just what it is. It doesn't mean that one is right, the other's wrong. They both are clearly what they are, especially when you consider in the East, all of the festivals, as I say, all of the months begin and the festivals begin when sun, moon, and earth come together and start a cycle. Last thing I want to say is that to really understand the miracle of these three, of sun, moon, and earth being in alignment, it's not just that the lunar cycles correspond, that 12 lunar cycles occur within 1 year, but even the relationship of the sun, moon, and earth are now in an enormous synchronicity. Many of you have heard me talk about this before, but I'll just say it again. You realize that if you've never pondered the miracle that the sun and the moon look exactly the same size from where we are, you should ponder that for a minute. The sun and the moon have nothing to do with each other. They're just two rocks moving around. Well, one's a ball of fire, one's a rock. So again, just think about the fact that this rock happens to go around this rock almost perfectly 12 times as it goes around this ball of fire is pretty remarkable. But not only that, this rock, relative to this ball of fire from where we are, looks like exactly the same size. I mean, find two objects now that look exactly the same size from where you are. Take an arbitrary object so one fits perfectly inside the disk of the other. It's not an everyday occurrence, and it didn't happen overnight. It took 4.5 billion years for that to happen. And the formula 108 it comes from this primal relationship, because the reason you have this work is because the length between the Earth and the Sun is equal to 108 sun diameters. The length between the Earth and the Moon is equal to 108 moon diameters, approximately. Again, it's not exact, it's 108 to 109. So the number 108 is the original and the primal relationship of 108 is there are 108 suns between us and the sun and 108 moons between us and the moon. This is why this ratio of scale and distance renders the sun and the moon to look exactly the same size from where we are. It's not just they look that way, they're in a vibrational simpatico, and they have been for a few 100,000 years at least, because the moon is slipping out of its orbit about 1.5 inches each year, so it's now in that sweet spot, which it'll be for a few 100,000 more years. But again, these three bodies related to each other are the origin of everything. And when we want to understand, and it took 4.5 billion years for that to happen. And when we want to understand something like, why are there 12 zodiac signs? Well, because there are 12 lunar cycles in 1 year. These are sun signs. If you want to say they're sun signs, you can say, they're sun signs in a tropical sense. When, especially in the West, they're tropical signs, and they were referred to as sun signs in India as well. Because again, they're approximating the sun. They're bringing the sun into the moon and earth relationship. So instead of just timing everything to lunar cycles, we then connect the lunar cycles to the solar cycle. So there are two ways to mainly do it. One is based on the fixed positions, which again, because Vedic astrology originated with that sidereal placement, or with that sidereal zodiac, we then, the rishis then carved up 12 30-degree increments from that. That's why it happens. And by the way, those of you who are listening and you're saying, well, if you're using sidereal zodiac, then what about the 13th sign Ophiuchus and da-da-da? This is why that doesn't matter, frankly. Because it's not actually, and even, the tropical astrologers who now want to say, well, you can't really do that because this constellation is that big and it's this and that. It's also an extrapolation. Both 12 sign zodiacs are an extrapolation. There are no lines in the sky, okay? It should be obvious. You're just arguing over which extrapolation you believe in. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument, frankly. It's ridiculous to try to prove one wrong over the other. They're both extrapolated, okay? But they're extrapolated for different reasons. If one thinks that this extrapolation is better than that one, fine. Then use that and then do your research and see which one works for you. It's okay. Okay? There's enough room for both extrapolations to work. Okay? So, but the reason that we extrapolate 12 from Ashwini is because that was foundational in the Vedic approach, and most Vedic astrologers throughout the course of history and even now find that those Vedic methods work best with that zodiac. But what we shouldn't lose sight of is the primal relationship between sun, moon, and earth. That relationship between scale and distance, rendered alive by the 108. This is why when we're counting our mantras, and these mantra beads have 108, this is what we're symbolizing. We're symbolizing the sun and the moon, and the relationship between the earth and the moon and the sun. 108 moons between us and the moon, 108 suns between us and the sun. And those 12 lunar cycles that happen within one solar cycle have approximated calendars for thousands of years. The Western tropical, calendars now try to approximate this by adding on an extra, 5 days every 4 years, so that the solstices don't leak back and wind up being out of whack, because it's much more related to the seasons. And in India and in the East, their months still begin and still revolve, and their festivals revolve more around the new moons. So I'm doing this on leap day. So today is the leap day and of 2016. So I hope this was something that was interesting for you. It's definitely interesting for me to stay grounded in this. You need to stay grounded in the astronomy behind it all. Share this with others. Leave a comment.